Hello everyone, I'm Tony Southcott.
And I'm Komet, and welcome to another Human Echoes movie review. We're very excited to be doing a continuation of one of our favorite directors on this one. Today we're talking about Nightingale, directed by
Jennifer Kent.
Jennifer Kent, who is she New Zealand or Australia?
She's Australian.
So she's an Australian director, and the original movie that she did that we loved was Babadook. If you want to see our review of Babadook, go ahead and check out in the description below.
Yeah, and that one's a booze and booze, so you get a good drink to go with it as well.
Yeah.
But with this movie, we didn't have a lot of expectations about what to expect. We knew it was going to be a period piece, but I didn't know exactly where it was going to be. This is set in 1800s Tasmania during British colonialism. It might have been 1700s or 1800s, but it was
early,
in that time period.
Very early British colonization of the Australia area. Like Tony said, this is specifically in Tasmania, which is an island below, south to the coast?
Yeah, it's on the, I want to say the southeast side of Australia.
Exactly.
It's been a while since I've looked at an Australian map.
And we didn't know that. Tony actually called it because of who the director was, but I thought, me not knowing anything, that this took place in England or something. But later on, you meet the aboriginals and you're like, oh, okay, this makes a lot more sense. And like Tony said, there hasn't been many movies about this time period, and It was very, very interesting. Yeah, it's one of those time periods where there has to be a ton of stories. Mm-hmm. There has to be a lot of interesting things that went into the founding of Australia, because you've got the aboriginal peoples, which are one of the more interesting tribal peoples you can even study, as well as the kind of prime of British colonialism. It's probably a little bit past that maritime thing that they had going on. But it's still they're still all over the world. It's the sun never sets on the British Empire. Mm-hmm. So there was a lot to take in here, a lot of different things to see. Even the costumes and everything else that went into this added a lot of flavor to the movie. Yeah, and it felt very well done period piece, which I very much appreciate. I gotta say that in school you learn about the British Empire? Yeah, definitely an empire. The British Empire sending their convicts to Australia and then kind of leaving them and everything. You hear that a lot, but this is a story specifically kind of about that, and it was fascinating. I was very happy once we kind of started learning all the clues about why these people were there and what happens after they are there. And I enjoyed it quite thoroughly. Yeah, you've basically got people that are trying to earn their lot to become citizens of Australia based on the type of crimes they committed. It could be a couple years, it could be 10 years, it could be 5 years, whatever. But you've also got the sub-story here about what's happening with the Aboriginal people, where some of them are trying to kind of adapt in using Western clothes, and a lot of them are also just in their tribal stuff in the jungle. And I was reading during our little break between this that Jennifer Kent was trying to be as sensitive as possible and hired a lot of Aboriginal scholars to try to make this as authentic as you could be for the time period. We appreciate that so much in movie makers when they actually take the time to get the science right, or the culture right, or the time period right, and it pays off in this. You can tell that the actors in this are Australian who are Aboriginal descent, and it just adds that much more depth to the story. Yeah, it just makes things a little bit more authentic and real. It's real hard to walk that line and not make caricatures of people. And this movie, for the most part, has some intense character depth. I would say that the main the main antagonist sometimes feels a little cartoonish in the level of evil that he has. But also, we're trying to tell a story where things are getting out of control, so you can kind of see that happening. I thought it was believable for the most part, but there are a few times where it's just that seems beyond necessary. Yeah, and I agree, but I also have to disagree some. I think when it reminds me of Wild West times. Yeah. I don't know where the Wild West is in centuries or whatnot. That was 1870s. Yeah, so, I guess this is 100 years before that, but where people who are in charge can get away with whatever they can get away with because they're in charge. And I think that has a lot of truth behind it, especially for during this time period. And especially for people that would be considered much underclass citizens, like the people who are convicts, which are still subjects of the British Empire, and then the Aboriginals, which they basically didn't treat as humans. So sorry about that little bit of audio, but we fixed it, and the rest of the video is going to be fixed, so that's okay. as we were talking about, there's a bit of a subclass of her being a woman and not having as much rights as other people. I don't think that was very heavy with this, which I appreciate. But also you do get the feeling that she is vulnerable to those around her because she is not only a convict, but she is a woman and whatnot.
Yeah, and what we're looking at with this movie is basically just a hard revenge story, which is awesome. I love revenge movies. There have been some that are really heavy-handed, not that appropriate. Like, I liked Even Lambs Have Teeth, like Last House on the Left, like all these other ones where like revenge stories can be great. And there are some not so good ones where it just seems outlandish and everything. This felt like a genuine revenge thing, and it even had some commentary on revenge with things that happen later in the story and with people's ability to take that sort of thing.
So. And going on that same route, the reason typically we only do horror movies, we chose this one because it is by a director who did what we believe to be a horror movie, and The Babadook. I would classify this as a true horror story. The scenes in this, I will put a disclaimer for all those people. There are very, very sensitive scenes in this, and it could be triggering to some people.
Yeah, like the first 20 minutes of this movie is basically a nonstop trigger warning. And then in the middle of the movie, it gets worse. Well, I don't know if it's worse than what happened in the beginning, but it gets back to that level.
Yeah.
Like, you could say that this is possibly more of a thriller, but the way it handles unhinged violence, especially violence towards women, is horror straight up. This is not something where you like that really skirts the edges of any issue.
No.
Like, Jennifer Kent leads hard into it, and I feel like that's why this got a VOD release, is because a lot of people, a lot of distributors wouldn't bank a lot of money on this going into theaters because of how hard those scenes went. I don't know if that's 100% true because this is available on Hulu right now. It just didn't feel like a movie that hits the mainstream and like goes viral in movie theaters.
I'm very
It's
sad.
good enough to do that, but I think the violence almost hinders that mainstream ability.
And we're not talking like gore or limbs chopping off or anything, but we're specifically talking about the horrendous scenes are rape. Like these are some of the worst and most accurate, I think, to what actual rape scenes are that I've ever seen in an actual movie.
Yeah, and like this is colonialism. This is like this is that type of thing where it's like it was just part of the way business was done, and it's
they got away with it too. Like that's
sort of. But like that's more spoilers for the end. It's one of those things where I'm glad that people are willing to make these films, but if people have had those things happen to them, I might tell them to skip this movie just because it's so realistic and hardcore.
It's very triggering, I would say, and it hits hard within the first 20 to 30 minutes of the movie is very, very rough. And I agree with Tony, is that if you've had those experiences happen to you, maybe skip this movie. Albeit it is amazing and it is definitely worth the time to watch it, but if that's something that hits you hard, I would skip it.
And I'll say this, like whenever I read an article and I read that there's a trigger warning at the beginning, I usually scoff and I'm like, that's just like people need to harden up and all this other stuff. This movie is hard enough that I'm like, yeah, this needs like you better read what the contents are about before this one.
Yeah, and I agree. So moving on from that, I gotta say the acting in all of those scenes and moving forward was phenomenal.
Yeah.
This is an Irish-Italian-born woman. I cannot pronounce her name, so I'm not even going to try to, but she did an incredible job.
Yeah. And also, there's a lot that has to do with singing, which relates to the Nightingale. Also, there's a lot of themes about, different types of birds in this that I'm still trying to unpack a little bit. But her singing, especially in Gaelic and all this, is some of the prettiest singing I've heard in, any movie. And
I hope it's real. I think it's real.
I think she might have been lip-syncing for some of those scenes, but, it also, just the way that the exhales and things were, it did not sound like it was lip-syncing for all of it. So I think that there were times where she was and times where she wasn't, and whenever she was allowed to be more emotional and it wasn't, it was more impactful.
Yeah, and she, I feel that some actresses in movies, they feel like they need to be pretty throughout the entire thing. I'm not saying that she's ugly in any way, shape, or form, but she was willing to be that person.
Well, they allowed her to be plain, and they allowed her to be vulnerable, and they allowed her to be downright,
brutalized.
Like dirty and bruised and not perfect hair. And I appreciate when a filmmaker is able to do that. And that also goes back to it being a very good period piece. I also have to give very, very high regards to her supporting actor. His name was Billy in the movie. Again, he is a Aboriginal descendant from Australia, and I'm not going to be able to pronounce his name, so I'm sorry. Or
the tribe. The tribe is a very long, I'm going to be putting a little bit of things like down below for the particular tribes they were talking about, but it's one of those things where they brought in ceremonies that were original from these people. They brought in a lot of the language, although there were tons of different languages for Aboriginal tribes. They picked one of the Tasmanian tribes and went with it. So there's a lot of detail that went into getting his character right. You see some of the other Aboriginals that are living the completely native life, and then you see some that are kind of walking the borders and them trying not to anger the people that they're helping and trying to find where they fit in with this new colonial lifestyle. And I think that part of the commentary on that and part of what happens with certain characters is really fascinating. The risks some of them take and all that are just... It's really compelling to watch.
Yeah, it's also brutal, and it makes you think again about all of the British invasions that have gone out throughout history. I was thinking about South Africa. I was thinking about Australia, and there's a few other places too.
India, things like that. They're all
places
over the
like
places.
that, and I just can't imagine what these people actually went through. And how it was heartbreaking watching this Aboriginal watch other people of his tribe or those around him get slaughtered over and over again, and I just could never imagine it.
Yeah, and that's very hard to deal with in this movie. And you want him to just fly off the handle, and you want him to get the revenge. And it's more than just her revenge story. It's a lot about what he's dealing with and even helping her and the level of hatred she shows towards him. Sometimes that gets really uncomfortable, and it's not one of those where it's Dances with Wolves where everybody is gonna fall in love and do all that sort of stuff, but it's something where people can find some understanding through their own heartache.
And comfort in somebody who's experiencing the same thing as you're experiencing, and you see the buildup of that, and it's very appreciative, and you see the trust between these two people build until they rely on no one else but each other. It was a great way to do character development and storytelling in this movie.
Yeah, and it's both a pragmatic and an authentic friendship that's bonding there, and it's just good to see. It was well written. I'm trying to think of my main criticisms of this movie, and most of them come down to just a few small personal quirks about villains and how things were written. And even then, it wasn't bad. It was just there were some things that resonated as being outlandish, and that was it. And they're minor. So as far as this movie goes,
talked about, what was that phrase about the axe? That didn't happen.
I thought there would be a Chekhov's axe because of the way a scene was moving, and it was surprising that it wasn't there. Sometimes the tropes don't show up like you did. If you wanted to talk about tropes with this movie, the only one that's really solid is the whole break the cutie thing, where you take somebody who's just a normal person, who's sweet and everything, and you absolutely break them.
I did
but
not know
other than that, it's still not even quite the rampage you'd expect from that. It's a revenge movie that has subtle undertones, and it doesn't devolve into just a
killing spree.
It's a lot deeper than that. There is one point with her where I was a little confused as to her choice whenever she kind of pumps the brakes a little bit. And it's not that it's bad, it's that I haven't seen it much in a movie, and I was trying to figure out fully what was happening with the character. And I honestly think it's a good thing whenever you're trying to figure out more about the motivations of characters and trying to understand them. So I would say that this movie was the movie I was hoping for from Jennifer Kent. It took her I want to say 5 years, 5 or 6 years before she got from Babadook to here.
Okay.
And it's good to see that she's back and that she's doing something that is once again kind of no holds barred, just going after it. So.
I have to say that I liked this a lot more than the Babadook. I just think I connected with the characters a lot more. I liked the story that was told. It wasn't as fantasy driven as the Babadook was.
Yeah, this is very much hard set in reality. there are scenes with dreams, but it's very obvious that those are dream sequences. Like,
And they're well done dream sequences.
and it's about trauma there, so it's like
PTSD.
it makes sense. Yeah, it never felt like it was wrong or bad or didn't belong.
Yeah, exactly. So I gotta say, well, did it scare you?
I don't think so, but it wasn't meant to scare. It was meant to make you revulsed. It was meant to inspire like kind of like dread, and it was meant to make you really dislike people.
Yeah.
But it was not meant to be scary.
For me, I always think that true horror is when if you were to be in that person's situation and how horrifying it would be to you. So to me, this movie is terrifying, not because it would ever happen to me because I'm not in that time period or whatnot, but the scenes in it and whatnot, I would call this true horror, but we have two. It's very different, I think.
Oh, like it's more about the idea of like genre versus like,
Yeah.
in that. And like I think that if something qualifies as absolutely horrific, you can call it horror.
Yeah.
Some people don't. Like that's something that people can talk about in the comments of this video. If you thought this was horror, if you thought it was thriller, like
drama.
the best horror movies a lot of times walk the lines between separate things because they try to do more than the old school idea of horror, which is like what's the biggest bloodbath we can come up with.
Exactly.
And to me, that's not what good horror is about. It's about making a compelling story that also includes some of those elements.
So what do you think the rewatchability on this is?
I think it's good. It is long. It is a 2 hour and 15-minute movie, so it's a little bit harder to just like plop down on the couch and rewatch. I think that I could easily rewatch this again to try to pick up some things, try to understand it. But it's so direct that I don't think you really have to rewatch to pick up like subtle hints about things.
Yeah, I don't think there's a lot of, I mean, I'm sure there's imagery and whatnot, but it's not like Hereditary where you can go back and see clues about what's going to happen the entire time. I say I could probably watch this once a year around Halloween time.
Yeah.
I think it's a very good, like, fall, spooky, let's get into the mood type of movie.
Yeah, and along with that, it's well made, and it's a period piece, which pushes it up in my eyes because I love seeing history. And from the sounds of it, they did a very, very good job on that. So just as the period piece, it's got rewatch value. In
itself. So the final question, did you like it?
I definitely liked it as much as you can like a movie that inspires such negative feelings in a person. But it's one of those where like they take you to deep waters and they make you like earn your way back. And that's a good thing in a movie.
Yeah, and I gotta say, I really liked this movie. Again, I was thinking more of it like a seesaw. In the very beginning, they really tip you over one way, but as the story goes on, they're able to kind of level it all out, so it's not as triggering, I think is the perfect word for it. But yeah, that's I liked it a lot.
Yeah, and I think that's all I have to say about it without getting into dozens of spoilers.
Yeah, or like just discussing it in general. If any of you want to just discuss it with us, let us know because I got things to say that are spoiler.
You can pop into our Discord and we'll have a discussion there. Hit us up on social media, all those sorts of things in the...
Thank you guys so much, and if you liked this video, go ahead and like and subscribe to our channel. We do lots of different movie reviews, horror movie reviews. We do original versus remake, where we compare two movies that are basically the same.
Well, it's the old school versus the new school most of the time whenever somebody remakes a movie.
I like the name remake versus original, but some people don't. Apparently talking about trigger, it's a triggering.
Yeah, remake is a trigger these days.
Exactly. But if you really, really like our content, I implore you to check out our Patreon at patreon.com/humanechoes. You get exclusive content, exclusive art, and content early. Who doesn't like that?
Yep. Talk to you guys later. Have a very good week.
Bye.